I want to thank everybody for coming on the call. Super excited to have Lisa Fox with us this evening. And it was a topic that came up this year in Partners in Policymaking in this class this year, specifically to inclusion or the lack of inclusion of young children with disabilities around our state. And we wanted to make sure that we had a professional come on to be able to talk to us about why this really shouldn't be such a big issue, and to give you some tools on how to address this particular concern within your area of the state. And we know, like for instance, this year's class, we had people in the class from the Keys all the way up well into the Panhandle. So we're really hoping that these sessions not only benefit those who are in the more metropolitan areas, but also those people who live out in the more rural areas who might really struggle to find the supports and the services that they need. And so we're hoping that these are beneficial to you. And please let me know if there's some topics that you'd like to hear or you'd like to see, because we've had some pretty good people coming on as our guest presenters, and I'd like really to keep this going. So if you know of a topic that you really feel like the partners graduates need to know more about, let me know, and I will reach out to those professionals that we have throughout our state. Come on to talk to you guys. For tonight, we have Lisa Fox with us. She is professor at the Department of Children and Family Studies in the College of Behavioral and Community Services at USF in Tampa. She was the principal investigator of the Department of Education, OSEP, funded Technical Assistance Center on Social Emotional Intervention for Young Children, and is the co-director and principal investigator of the Florida Center for Inclusive Communities, University's Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. And I actually saw Lisa present, I think it was at a CARD conference. It was a couple of years ago. I've been doing this for a while, so it might have been more than a couple, but I was so impressed by her knowledge of young children and the inclusion opportunities for young children and the benefits, that when I was thinking about this topic, I really couldn't think of anybody that would be better to come and speak to you guys about it than Lisa Fox. So Lisa, we want to thank you and welcome you to our little graduate program tonight.
Great. Thanks for having me, and congratulations to all of you for being in Partners in Policymaking. And I'll get to the punchline first, and then I'll unpack it for you. So kids can be included. They should be included. It's better for them to be included. They have a right to be included. And actually, the only way we're going to make it happen is if people like you are informed and can move that advocacy agenda. So I do have slides. Those of you who are just on the phone, you can't see them. I'll try to be descriptive, and you'll get the slide deck afterwards. So it has some links in it to resources that will be helpful to you if you're interested in this, or you're assisting another family with trying to access inclusion, or if you're a part of a local initiative to try to move the needle to increase inclusion. So if you move to the next slide, what I want to just unpack, and actually I'll answer any questions. So if you want to talk or offer challenges, your experiences, or barriers, why I talk through these resources and what I have to say, feel free to interrupt and chime in. So first of all, I want to head on why include young children. But I think you're here because you know the answer to that question already. I will share a little bit of the research that supports inclusion. I want to talk about some federal resources that could be really pivotal in helping a family advocate, become educated around inclusion, advocate for inclusion, a family professional, as well as for communities or local education agencies to think about how to move the needle around inclusion. I'm going to share with you a national initiative too that I'm involved in. So I work here at Florida Center for Inclusive Communities as a professor. And Florida Center for Inclusive Communities is the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. You need to know we exist. And the other one is at Mailman and University of Miami. And so at our university sites that are very engaged around trying to help get evidence-based practices and do research around those practices related to the supported people with developmental disabilities, we also bring in a lot of projects. So I participate on a federal project that is really trying to help all states do a better job with early childhood services, and it's called the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about work we're going to do there to try and help influence states, and we've actually developed some materials that might be helpful for you in your work in trying to influence inclusion. So if we move to the next slide, my next slide just says pretty simply, it's the law. So for why inclusion, first of all, it is the law to include children. And I know there are a lot of yes buts that are put on the table, but that is what IDEA is about. And there are federal resources that have really explained that yes, indeed, we do mean to include even our youngest learners. So our children 3 to 5 years old who are considered preschoolers and in the preschool special ed program, that they should have a right to high quality, inclusive early childhood programs. If you go to the next slide, there's 2 federal resources. Those of you on the phone, you'll get the link to it. So one of them came out in the Obama administration, and it was a position paper, and it's really quite important because it was put out as a policy paper, and it's still on the Department of Education's website, although in the current administration people got nervous that it could be taken down, but it's still up. And it was not just a statement by the Department of Ed, but it was also a statement by Health and Human Services. And why that's important is because Health and Human Services is in charge of child care and public pre-K programs now. And so for those federal agencies to come together and write a policy statement around the importance of inclusion for children with disabilities in my field was a pretty big deal. And that policy statement actually set an expectation about the provision of a high quality program. It talked about both the legal reasons and the research reasons. And so you can click on this link and read. It's a multiple page, probably I think about 15 pages statement. There's also an executive summary if you want the short version. It talks about what the challenges are that states are experiencing and that local education agencies might be experiencing, providers and families. And then it links to resources and recommendations. So it actually says, here's what we ought to do about it. Here's what we think states should be doing about it, programs should be doing about it, to make a difference for children. So that's really important. And that's something that I could see a parent bringing to a meeting and saying, okay, let's talk about inclusion and the value of inclusion and the importance of it. So I wanted you to know about that resource. If you'll go to the next slide. The second thing that I think is really pivotal and important for understanding what does the Department of Ed, who of course guides states in the implementation of IDEA, what is their position around FAPE and inclusive programs for young children? And so it's a dear colleague letter, and I'm sure in your partners class you talked about dear colleague letters. Dear colleague letters are letters to people in the field to offer more explanation about what we meant by something that's in IDEA and how we're interpreting it at the Office of Special Ed Programs. And so this dear colleague letter came out in 2017, and it said in the very first line, all young children with disabilities should have access to inclusive, high quality early childhood programs where they're provided with individualized and appropriate supports to help them meet high expectations. What's interesting in this letter is they say that one of the pushbacks is, well, we don't have preschool children in our public schools, so how would we include these children? How could we possibly include these children? And they say in this dear colleague letter that you should provide FAPE regardless of whether or not that local education agency has a public preschool program for children without disabilities. And they go on to say that some possibilities might be that child could be included in a kindergarten class, a public preschool program, a private preschool program, a community child care facility, or in the child's home. Now, if the child is in a state where there is no public preschool program, they also say IDEA money, if everyone agrees and this child's already enrolled in private program and everyone agrees that that is the appropriate placement for the child, then you could use IDEA funds to even pay for the child to be there. Now, that's not going to apply in Florida, because in Florida, we have public preschool programs. And so we already have public preschool programs where children could be included and should be included. And so that shouldn't be the situation where they would be paying a child's tuition, since we have those programs for them. So that Dear Colleague letter can be really important for understanding what was meant and what should happen. It could be an important piece at the LEA level or in your advocacy.
Hey.
You guys, if you're on the call, can you please mute? Everybody should be muted except for the speaker.
And I think, Anne, you might have controls to mute some people if you want. But if you have all right. Okay, so I'm good. I think, am I unmuted? Somebody say yes. Anne, am I unmuted?
Well,
You're good.
Yep, okay, good. So the other resource on this slide is called the Finance Toolkit. And this ECTA Center is the one I referred to that I'm faculty with. And so we help states think through policies and practices around IDEA and Part C programs, and give either the Part C coordinator at the state level or the pre-K special ed coordinator technical assistance. And one of the things that my colleagues developed on that ECTA Center was, how will we pay for this? What are our options? How do we fund preschool inclusion? And there's some really good ideas in that. And so I like to looking at it and understanding all of those options, because it helps me explain when people push back about how would we pay for this and how would we figure it out. You know, if people feel very stuck, like, well, we're just going to have our preschool special ed classrooms because we know how to do that, and that's simple to figure out. You just use your IDEA money to fund it. And they're not rising to the challenge of getting creative about thinking, how do I support a child with a disability to be in a voluntary preschool classroom, a Head Start classroom, or in a community-based classroom? How will I provide quality services to that child? And so take a look at this document, because I think it'll really unlock for you how states are accomplishing in this, how it might be done, and how it could be done at our various school districts in the state of Florida in order to support children to be included. So if you go to the next slide, please. So what we hear from people about, well, we can include, is first of all that we can't blend those funds, which is not true. Yes, we can't blend money together and throw it all in a pot, but IDEA money can be used to pay for children's special education services and supports. A child can be in their private preschool program, and a school district can pay for an itinerant special educator to go and provide those special education services to the child. The school district can bring together VPK kids, those are voluntary preschool kids. All kids in Florida have access to a 4-year-old program. They can create what's called a blended classroom, where you have 4-year-olds and for children with disabilities in the same classroom. All of those are possibilities. Some pushback is children aren't ready to be able to benefit from inclusion. I'm going to share with you some of the research about that. And so that's clearly not the case. And you know what Lou Brown says ready means never, right? When they start saying you're not ready yet, that's kind of a slope to not ever getting what you need for a child with disabilities, is the notion that they have to earn it or have to be ready for it. And that's really, I think, antithetical to what IDEA is about. Parents don't want it. I think parents want the very best for their child. And if we're not confident that we're going to provide a really high quality program, they might not want what we have to offer them. And so we need to push for the notion that a high quality program is what we're asking for and what we would be settling for, that it's not an either or, that there's the high quality program that's special and then the lack of a high quality program that would be inclusion. Some people have pushed back and said, this is, great, but typically developing children aren't going to learn or could be harmed by, or their learning would be affected by a child with a disability being included. And there's zero research, and actually research to the contrary, that actually having children with disabilities included in their classroom and the kinds of classrooms those become are helpful to typically developing kids. Some people have said, well, only in a special ed setting can I get the real intensity of instruction that this child needs to progress and to do well. And again, what the research suggests is that a high quality inclusive program can be even more beneficial to the child with disabilities. Others have said, a classroom for typically developing kids is just going to be too busy and too much for a child with a disability. And if we're thinking about a particular child, and maybe it's a particular child who's got some sensory issues and probably needs things more slowly delivered or less stimulating, what we need to do then is find those accommodations and supports that we could use in the inclusive setting, because that's going to be persistent, right? So that issue will be something that persists over the child's life. And making those modifications or accommodations or adding those supports will be really important to that child's learning. It shouldn't preclude that child from being with his typically developing peers. So if you can go to the next slide. So let me tell you some of the things we know from research. And actually, I stole these slides. I have a colleague I work closely with who's particularly brilliant about this, and he's the designer of an inclusive program for children with autism, and that program's been around for decades and has really demonstrated the amazing outcomes that can occur for children that are included in that kind of environment. And so one of the things that we know from the literature is that high quality settings are those environments that consistently show that kids have great learning outcomes. And there's no research that says if a child goes to a high quality inclusive programs that they won't progress. Now, there is some research about the detrimental effects of segregated settings, and that non-inclusive environments can negatively affect a child's learning. And you could think about social and communication skills. Those are two domains that are really have to be taught with a response partner, right? If I'm going to learn social skills, I need someone to socially interact with. And if I'm learning communication skills, I need someone to talk to and someone who's presenting interesting ideas that I want to comment on. And so when we have children who are working on those two domains in inclusive environments, there are many more opportunities for them to learn that and to practice those skills than can ever be presented within a segregated setting. The bottom line about all of the research about inclusion is that fully inclusion options really beat the alternative, a segregated placement, of a ratio of about 15-1. So really strong evidence that the inclusive placement really wins hands down over a segregated program. Now that's you'll notice I keep qualifying high quality inclusion program. That doesn't mean that somebody couldn't design something that was inclusive and not good for children at all, typically developing or kids with disabilities. So the next slide. So the research includes children with developmental delays, children with mild and severe autism spectrum disorders, children with multiple disabilities, children with intellectual disabilities, children with social emotional needs, children with hearing impairments, children with limited mobility. So it really isn't about readiness or a particular level of a disability. And so people should feel very strong in coming back if someone suggests, well, that's fine for children with mild disabilities, but this won't work for this particular kind of child, is we have lots of research evidence to the contrary of that. So you can go to the next slide. And then the other thing that we see is when people design full inclusion classrooms, they're thoughtful about the delivery of inclusive services, that often those are higher quality than other kinds of programs. The biggest effect that we get from high quality programs is social effects. So the social skills that children learn by being with typically developing kids. But social skills are not just about playing with others and making friends. Social skills are about being a member of a group, being persistent in a task, being able to meet challenges and without having a meltdown. Social skills are about a bigger domain than what we think about. It's not just about getting invited to a birthday party, but it's about learning how to be a part of a social group and be successful in school. And so I would put forth that if the greatest effect we get by having kids included is social skills, then that's a really valuable effect. And if you think about children with disabilities over their lifetime, the importance of social skills are, we see that in their ability to navigate academic environments, but importantly, we also see it being a huge piece of them being able to work after school is over. And so it really contributes to higher quality of life when they have better social skills. We also see that there's a difference in communication and cognitive skills, meaning that kids who go to inclusive settings have higher effects in terms of higher outcomes in their communication and cognitive skills. So all this research, I've offered a link if you want to have a printout of the research and a more detailed explanation, that you can access that on the web. So in addition to why is it good for children with disabilities, it's good for typically developing kids. So on the next slide, I have some of the summary of that research. And so typically developing kids, they do fine. So it doesn't mean that they learn less by being included with kids with disabilities, but they have equal or greater cognitive and language skills. They typically have fewer challenging behaviors in a high quality inclusion programs, and they benefit by having more advanced social skills as well as more accepting attitudes to people who are different. So some really nice outcomes for children without disabilities. So let me pause there and see if you have any questions about what the research says or what the federal requirements are for children to be included. And everyone's unmuted, so if you want to talk, you can talk.
Hi, this is Emily Lamberson from Okaloosa County.
Hi, Emily.
Hello. My district does a very poor job including disabled students with their non-disabled peers. Our inclusion rate the past 2 years has been right around 5%. And I've been approaching this with my district because my child is 4 years old. And so I was wondering what a good general approach is when you just hit roadblocks. For example, last summer, I presented the Dear Colleague letter to my staffing specialist, and she actually said in the IP meeting and wrote in my IP notes that her interpretation was that the conversations about inclusion don't start until kindergarten. And I've been through filing state complaints and all of that, but I just keep hitting roadblocks. And so I was wondering if you have any general suggestions or advice for how to proceed.
So have you gone all the way up to the state director of special ed in complaining?
I did, yes.
And you got no response or some kind of less than adequate?
Just responses that kind of have been ineffectual. And my perception is that my district is they need to build capacity. They don't know where to start, and they're not, as far as I know, willing to really look at the resources I presented.
So, it's curious to me because all of the states are really under scrutiny around their inclusion rates. That's a really low rate, and so they'll be cited for that with a determination about the low rate of inclusion. We have enough districts that have much better rates of inclusion so it's not a Florida problem, right? It's an Okaloosa problem. So if you can't get the attention of the state director of special ed, I don't know kind of what's next, because she's responsive to the feds about it, but I wonder if that's your next stop, or if your next stop is with Disability Rights Florida to see if they would want to engage with you. Another route may be, and I'll share with you something that happened here in our district, another route might be to say, why don't we can we work together towards making this happen? If other districts can do it, for example, Hillsborough County, which is a really large, kind of out of control, ginormous school district, can do it, surely we can move the needle. So Leon County is a good example, Pinellas County, Hillsborough County, and they figured out some strategies around it. So what could we learn from another school district so that we could make this happen? And how can I be a support for making it happen?
All right, thank you for those suggestions.
Yeah, the other issue is, you always can have an IEP meeting and go to due process over a placement. I know I probably shouldn't be saying that, but sometimes that's what we have to do to get change to happen.
True.
Other questions?
A lot of families are told that there just are no options, so that they don't have any inclusion, or like any classrooms are typically developing preschoolers to even offer as a placement. That's a common.
Right. Well, but in the Dear Colleague letter, and as Emily knows, it's, well, then you can place my child in a VPK and provide them with special education services within the VPK program. Right. Or if the school district, first of all, I would look to see, is the school district running a Head Start program, and does the school district include VPK classrooms on school campuses? And if they do have the places to include children. Right. And so it's not that they don't have options, it's that they've been unwilling to think about what the options are, right?
Right.
And to engage in kind of a systems change process to try to move the needle to make inclusion happen. And I'm not saying it's easy. And what's hard is if you're in a district where they're really resistive to it, or they've been unwilling to be creative, you're going to be on the leading edge, either through advocacy to get change to happen, or you're going to say, well, how do we work towards that? Bring some resources to the table to help them begin to work towards it. But it's going to be a longer process. Either one is probably not satisfying because your child is waiting now, right, for that kind of opportunity.
I find the same thing with services such as speech and language therapy services in preschool. A lot of times our office gets reports from families saying that the schools tell them in preschool they don't get speech and language because it's built into the natural curriculum of the pre-K curriculum. Mm-hmm. And that you'll get services when your child is 5 and goes to kindergarten.
Yeah, that's a new one to me. So, the kids have an entitlement to those related services, and that's really clearly explained in all of the OSA
Right.
regulations as well as the guidance documents.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it may call for that advocacy. So if that's systemically happening within that school district, that kids can't get speech and language services till they hit kindergarten, and they're not using IDEA dollars to provide that, $619 to provide speech and language, it might need more of a formal advocacy action to get that to change.
Right.
Because that's in clear violation of what's intended by the law. Man, it's depressing when you hear about these things, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let me tell you a few more things about inclusion, and then we'll get back to some questions. Let me just share a few more things that might be relevant. So could you go to the next slide, please? One thing I want you to know about is DEC recommended practices. And so when you're looking, when I keep saying a high quality program uses these practices. These are the professional practices in early intervention, early childhood special education. They're on the web. You can access them and read them. And this is what your kid should have. This is what the standard should be for a high quality program. So I just wanted you to know it existed, and I wanted you to know where to access it. So go to the next slide. So common options and options that could be available in Florida. And there's more information about kind of inclusion options on this website that I have it on the slide. One could be a model program, and I think these more rural programs probably don't have model programs, but some in Miami-Dade, they have, for example, the LEAP program, which is a model program for the inclusion of children with autism with typically developing kids. Another option is to have inclusion within a community program. So in Leon County, they have enough kids attending one program where they actually have a full-time early childhood special ed teacher who is funded by the school district, and they have enough kids with IEPs to merit a full FTE of a teacher who are fully included in a very high quality preschool program. They have an agreement with the preschool program. The teacher is funded by the district, works there. She provides really consulting services to each of the kids. They're not all in one class with her, but they're mixed in with everybody, and she makes sure their IEP goals are met. She or he makes sure the IEP goals are met. Another option, and this is an option that a lot of Florida school districts are moving towards to make things happen, is to have what we call a blended classroom. And so a blended classroom would have voluntary preschool, pre-K kids in the classroom, and then children with disabilities. And then typically it's taught by a special educator and an early educator kind of as a teaching team or a co-teaching team. Or taught by a teacher who has dual certification so that they can teach both kids with disabilities and kids without disabilities. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story. In Hillsborough County, what happened here, and I've been here a very long time, and I was frustrated for a while about the lack of movement around inclusion, and actually went to bat a couple of times with families who wanted their child included, with like little tiny incremental success, not any systems change. But they ended up with a preschool special ed director, a little kind of change in leadership, and she was really committed to trying to figure inclusion out. And here in Hillsborough County, I think she has maybe, I don't remember how many, but it's at least 200. What would be 200 classrooms for children with disabilities, children who are receiving pre-K special ed services. And so it's a lot of kids. It's really hard to figure out, you know, with just the enormity of it. So she went to a talk that one of my colleagues did, and using this book I'll share with you called the Preschool Inclusion Toolbox, and listened to the research presentation, and she's just like, why are we not making this happen? We've got to figure out the way to make it happen. And so she convened a group of leaders in our community in the Tampa Bay area that are in Hillsborough County, who are in childcare and early childhood, as well as people in her department in early childhood special ed and related services, and the person from the Early Learning Coalition. So she brought together a community group to talk about how could we move the needle on this? How could we make a difference and make it happen? And their investment in making it happen. And I think the time is really right for that, especially given that policy statement. And if you look at in our field in early childhood, everybody is about making sure children with disabilities are included. So there's no early educator who's going to say that's a bad idea. There might be individual ones, but all of our organizations say this is the thing we ought to be doing, and we all need to work towards that. So she had this kind of big meeting about how do we move the needle, and then she decided we're gonna make a difference here. And so she worked towards two things: the blended VPK classrooms, and we have a whole bunch of those now, and then itinerant special ed teachers. And so if a family wanted their child to continue in the childcare program that they had been in all along, or the preschool program they had been enrolled in, then we have an itinerant special education teacher who goes and provides consulting special education services for that individual child. Does that mean that child has a early childhood special educator that's one-on-one and teaching them? No, it means that they show up and they make sure the IEP is being implemented. They teach the classroom teacher how to do that. They monitor the IEP, make sure that data are collected on objectives, and make sure that the child's needs are being met. And so within 2 years, it flipped in our district. It was pretty remarkable. And it really took this person's willingness to do it, getting together with people in the community, and making a decision to try to move the needle to make it happen. So I was thrilled, of course, because I live here and I want those services to happen. But it also really restored my faith that a small group of people can get together and try and make something big like that happen, and to be able to accomplish it. So one of the things I'm working on is with this ECTA center that I work with, we're going to help states address this issue. So even though we talked about a county or two counties where they seem resistant to do it, we do see in the national data that we've kind of stalled across the country. It was much easier to think it's pre-K special ed programs, let's just create pre-K special ed classrooms and call it a day, and we will have met the needs of children. And so many states have stalled in their ability to get inclusion to happen and to meet the intent of IDEA. And so in this national project, and on the next slide I have a link to the website so you can learn more about it. We've created these national early childhood inclusion indicators. And so we have indicators for a state level group coming together and saying, we want to move the needle on preschool inclusion. So how cool would it be if Florida said, we want to move the needle on preschool inclusion, and brought together their Head Start partner and their Office of Early Learning partner and the folks from the Bureau of Special Ed to the table to figure out how to make that happen. And so we have created a tool that they can use to think about what do we need to think about and put in place to make that happen. And we're also going to recruit states to see who wants to really let us help them do that. But then we also created, on the next slide, a tool for the local education agency to think about how to make it happen. So let's say, Emily, are you Okaloosa County? Was that right?
Yes.
So let's say you got somebody's ear. And like, how could we bring a group together to try and figure this out? Because clearly in the Dear Colleague letter, the intention is that it will happen. How do we get together and bring a group together to figure out what we can do, how we can move the needle on that? And so this document, the Local Program Indicators of High Quality Inclusion, really lays out what are the components that a group needs to think about putting in place in order to get high quality inclusion in place. And the process, if you go to the next slide, is really outlined nicely in this book by two of my colleagues, the Preschool Inclusion Toolbox, which is how to get a district to move. So helping school districts move that policy change. I'm not up here marketing their book, but it was the one that really was instrumental in getting Hillsborough County to shift in what they were doing. And then the third thing we developed, and it's up for field review, all of these pieces. So there might be slight changes to it, but they're publicly available. So if you go to the next slide. So the third set of indicators we developed were for then, what should it look like in the classroom? And I think these indicators are going to be really important, because what we don't want and what we should never have to do is settle for a less than high quality environment for children with disabilities. And so it really lays out what should be in place for this to be considered a high quality inclusive setting. And those indicators are, if you go to the next slide, just kind of read them off to you. So it's about being in a classroom that really promotes and affirms children's individual differences. And so that feels very different than a child with a disability begrudgingly being allowed to be in a classroom. It is about family partnerships, and we've really broken that out, social emotional learning and development, having meaningful interactions with peers. So not just hanging out or getting access, but having meaningful participation and membership. It's about everything that's involved in a high quality curriculum, and we kind of spell that out. It's about people engaging in collaborative teaming, including related services folks that push in the classroom and provide those related services within the classroom, assessment and progress monitoring, and then culturally responsive practices. And so we've broken all of those out so that people really can conceptualize what ought to be in place to make a difference. So I'll stop, and we can you can pose more questions, or maybe we can brainstorm some particular solutions to some of the challenges that you've encountered. Other questions, challenges?
I just have a quick question regarding your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about slides. I was unable to tap into the computer. So I wonder if there is a possibility to make available your presentation.
Yes. So I think I think they'll be sending you the slides, and maybe yes, you'll get the slides, right?
I appreciate that.
Do you have any suggestions about how a family might, for instance, contact their early steps in their area to maybe start digging around for data and to kind of see like what maybe early steps and then fiddlers, like what they know, and the areas of the state that have like early learning coalitions as well, to figure out how to maybe benefit from just the regular preschools that are out there versus specialized or county-run pre-K programs.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about early steps being, unless the child's transitioning from C to B. Are you talking about, could we bring together a group to have a discussion about that? Or
Right.
Yeah.
And how to maybe work with because I know in Broward we do that. There's a committee through the Children's Services Council that focuses on birth to 5.
Good.
And early steps is on the committee, and we brainstorm with them because the kids are going to be transitioning out, and looking carefully at where are they transitioning to, and how can we look at more inclusive preschool as they exit early steps and into
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's kind of where this conversation then can lead to perhaps that systems change. And so the players in every community ought to be inclusion specialists that are probably housed in child care resource and referral, or they might be in your early learning coalition, the early steps folks, your pre-K special ed coordinator, and maybe a TAT specialist, the technical assistance professionals who are supposed to be helping districts do high quality preschool special education services. And so it really depends on relationships, right? If you're going to try to initiate, couldn't we all get together and begin to talk about this? And so you're going to need to find that champion and someone who's open to having that conversation about how do we make this happen. But the Early Learning Coalition would be in charge of kind of the subsidized childcare settings, and they have a window into and guide the voluntary pre-K dollars. And then your preschool special ed person is going to be an important partner. And Head Start is also an important partner.
Are there any other questions from anyone?
May we share these slides from this presentation with members of our school district administration?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And if technology worked out for us tonight, then Anne will have, this will all be recorded, and I'll be able to share it with everybody that way as well.
That sounds good. So we're, this initiative that I talked about of helping states and programs, local districts and programs, there'll be more coming out. So those websites I gave you, keep returning to them. I know we're all going to do a webinar and actually share some videos of what does high quality inclusion look like for people. You can also email me if you have a particular question. I'm completely fine with that. And when you share out the PowerPoint, you're welcome to share my email address. I think it might be on the first slide. I'm not sure. Yes, it's on the first slide. So you're welcome to email me. Don't hesitate to do that. I wish I had a better and stronger answer for how to move the system at that local level, but I think the first step is really aligning these resources, then becoming really vocal about it. And sometimes some families are going to have to make the hard decision about where they want to take their advocacy and whether or not they want to push it through due process or be on the other side where they get some traction to push the systems change initiative.
Can you maybe explain just a little bit, because you referred to before about the indicator. So the indicator being specific to inclusion.
So what I'm saying, at the very end, I talked about three documents that actually lay out what should states do to move the needle. What should they be thinking about? And we call them the state indicators for high quality, establishing high quality inclusion. And then we have, and they'll serve both as a guide of what they ought to be thinking about as well as a measure of their progress. And then the local one is, if you had a local team come together, what are the things they should be thinking about and putting in place to really move the needle for high quality inclusion? And then the last set of indicators are for classrooms, and what do classrooms need to have in place to be considered a high quality program?
But what about the indicators like you had shared with Emily about, speaking to the Department of Education about how they are responsible for promoting inclusion? And then of course we have, the BPIs in Florida. And, I find that with the partners classes the last couple of years, usually 50% or more of the people who come into the program, and these are people who are already, they're already kind of in it, as far as being, wanting to make change. And less than 50% of them typically know or have ever heard of a BPI.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not sure how much the BPI is really being used anymore, even though other states point to it as being something that's.
If I can weigh in on the BPI, so my district, like I mentioned, is one that has about a 5% inclusion rate for preschoolers, and our most recent BPI acknowledges that, and but they rated they rated that indicator as partially almost complete. So 5% is partially almost complete. So I spoke with the Florida Inclusion Network about that, and the response I got from that from Finn was, well, at least they didn't say it was fully complete. So here you have something where the data shows that they're nowhere near fully complete. They're saying they're close to it, and Finn says, well, okay. So even places that know and use the BPI are not using it in a way that's appropriate, it seems to me.
Right.
And there's no teeth behind it.
There's no teeth to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But actually, what you could do is it feels like you have could have quite a portfolio of evidence about resistance and unwillingness to do what is outlined in the Dear Colleague letter in the support of your child, right?
Yeah, I think so. And it's difficult to know if it's just plain old ignorance or willful ignorance or.
Yeah. And I think not having an answer from the state director of special ed that is more action oriented would concern me, and that might be something that disability rights could help you push back for. I mean,
what's your take on the Office of Civil Rights in situations like these?
I haven't had experience with the Office of Civil Rights recently, so it might be fruitful.
All right, thank you.
I was in a school district in Florida where they were pretty resistant to inclusion way back when and forever ago. And they had children with behavior disorders in a school, and it was 98% African American. And so the families came together and did an Office of Civil Rights complaint, and that got good traction and good movement. But there was also this variable of children in a really less desirable setting, not accessing services, and they were all children of color, mostly children of color. But I think it's in their purview, so it could be fruitful. I don't really know. Disability rights org would be the place I would start.
Okay, well, it's 8 o'clock. So I'm gonna, kind of call the meeting. I want to thank you. Let me just make sure. Is there any other questions before we close up? Okay, awesome. And we want to thank you so much for coming on and answering questions and going over some of this stuff. And like I said, hopefully the recording did work. Normally what I do is I keep a bunch of notes. So thank you very much for sending me the presentation so that way I could send that out. But hopefully we have the video recording, and we'll go ahead and make sure that everybody in the program has, the video so that they can go back and watch it. And then I'll email you if anybody lets me know that they have additional questions and are looking for specific resources that maybe you mentioned. And if they have any more questions, if that's okay.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming on board tonight. And we hope that you like this format. I know there are some people who are on a learning curve, so we may not have gotten everybody on here who freaks out at the idea of being on video conferencing. So, but I think they'll very much appreciate them being able to watch it afterwards. So thank you all. Have a fabulous night, and I will talk to you all soon.